So thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to be sharing some SEO test ideas that are inspired by the websites of Waterstones, WHSmith, and Barnes & Noble. It says 7+ here. I think we've got about 14 to go through. So I'll go through them as quickly as I can, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A bit as we go, as they come up. If we don't have time to get through them all, I will collate them all and we'll send them in an email so we remember to answer everyone's questions. And I've also put my email at the end, so if you want to contact me directly, you can do. So just one thing to mention before we get into the webinar. If you're interested in SEO testing, we have lots more examples that you can see in our case study library on our website. So we publish a new test every 2 weeks. And if you're not already on our case study email list, I highly recommend signing up for that as well. We'll basically just email you once that test goes live, once that case study goes live. We do them on a range of topics, a range of different industries, so you can get some inspiration there for test ideas. So you can use this QR code. I'll leave it up for a minute. That will take you to the page to sign up. There's also a link at the bottom of the slides. So once you get access to the slides, you can use that if you would like to. I'll just give a couple of seconds if you want to grab that link. Cool. So this is what we're going to be covering today. We're going to start by looking at how to get started doing SEO testing. Then we're going to come up with how we come up with the test ideas. And we'll run through the specific ideas that I've put together for the retail stores that we're looking at today. And then hopefully at the end, like I say, we'll have time for any questions. So let's get into how we do SEO testing. So I'll start by quickly covering why it's not as simple as just using an analytics platform to do before and after testing. So the reason why we don't recommend this is because it's hard to get accurate results when making a change and then looking at the data in analytics, mainly due to external factors and the fact that we're not able to account for them. So for example, you have your organic traffic report in Google Analytics. This has your data up until the point of your change. You've marked that up, this is when we made the change, and then once you've made that change, you have a look at the traffic and you see that it started to fall, and there's some big dips that you see following the change being made. The thing to consider here, though, is that it might not be necessarily to do with the change that you made, although at first glance it might look like it. Because what if I said there was a Google update here? A couple of weeks after you made the change, Google roll out an update. Now you have the question of, was this drop in traffic due to the change? Was it due to the Google update, or could it be due to both? But you wouldn't be able to confidently say what actually caused the impact to the traffic. And then what if we also factor in seasonal events? So a couple of weeks after the change was also Thanksgiving. This can make things even harder to actually say what was the cause of the traffic drop. So this is why we don't recommend just relying on what we would call before and after testing. Another question we hear frequently is, why can't we use rank tracking tools or Google Search Console? They're great questions. The reason that we can't do this is typically because as enterprise websites, we rank for hundreds of thousands of keywords, and we might not be able to track all of them. So if you roll out a change and then just rely on the keyword data, there's a chance that you will increase rankings on keywords that you might not even be tracking, or you might start ranking for new keywords that you're not yet tracking. So it's just not the most accurate way to do realistic and sensitive testing. And the same problem applies with Search Console data. So Ahrefs published a study recently which showed that over 50% of clicks that a site gets are hidden in Search Console. Therefore, it's just not sensitive enough to detect the small changes that you want to look for when you're doing testing. This isn't to say they're not useful tools to have and they can't be used as supplementary data, but it's important to be aware that they can't account for external factors and they're not going to show us the most accurate results when it comes to testing. So how do we ensure accuracy in our results? The first caveat I need to mention here before we dive in is just to keep in mind that there is some criteria for websites to be able to do SEO testing well. This isn't because we're trying to gatekeep, it's just because the change that we're trying to make, we need a fairly large website to do it, because we're going to have a group of pages that are going to be our control pages where we don't make any change, and then we want a group of pages that are going to be our variant page where we do make the change. So the more pages you have, the more robust your testing will be. Another common question we get is, how much traffic do we need? The general rule of thumb we say is about 1,000 organic sessions a day, so 30,000 organic sessions a month. Generally, that's the minimum we recommend, but we do have some customers that test on smaller site sections as part of their overall strategy. So it can be done, but we wouldn't recommend it as your main strategy. So the first step in setting up our SEO tests is to find a large group of pages that have the same template. So while these are all individual pages with individual content, they're all sat on the same template. Then we want to come up with the test idea itself. So for this, we always want to create a hypothesis, and this will ensure that our test is always built with the goal of increasing organic traffic in mind. So we'll start by thinking about what we know to be true based on what Google have said, together with best practice recommendations. So for this example, we know that Google can give different importance to content depending where it's placed on the page. Then we'll say what we believe will happen if we make the suggested change. So here our test is going to be to move content higher on the page, as we believe that will improve the relevancy of the page for our target keywords. And then we know this will be true because what we're going to be doing is testing moving that content higher up on the page for 50% of the pages which are within our site section. Then we want to decide which pages will remain unchanged as our control group and which pages we're going to be making the changes to. And this will be our variant group. So in order to see the best results from our test, this isn't something that we just want to be selecting randomly. The reason for this is because within every website, you're going to have a mixture of low and high trafficked pages, and there's going to be seasonal spikes to particular pages. So this is something that we want to keep in mind and take into consideration when we're choosing those pages. So the way that we work is looking at historical traffic patterns to create groups of pages that we're going to be testing on. So we'll use that data to create 2 buckets of pages for the test that are as statistically similar to each other as possible. What I mean by that is that they have roughly the same amount of traffic and they have the same traffic movements. So they'll go up at the same time, they'll go down at the same time, and they're impacted by the same external factors. So once we have our control and variant buckets defined, we can then build the change within Search Pilot for all of our pages and apply it just to our variant groups of pages. So you'll see here with our pages in the variant group, they have that new design where we've moved that text up, whilst our control pages have stayed the same. Then once the test is launched, we can measure the results within the platform itself. So you can see here that the test itself started on this date. Everything before that is historical data. So that's what's been used to build the model of traffic patterns, what we think the traffic will look like had we not made any changes. And that's what this dotted line here shows. And then we'll compare that to the actual traffic for the variant pages where we've made that change. Here that's represented as that solid purple line. That's the real traffic that we'll see to the variant pages each day. So you can see here, initially when the test first began, there's a period where nothing's really changed. And then once the change has been picked up by Google, you can see that the actual traffic starts to outperform the forecasted traffic. So this is implying to us that this is a positive change that we're testing. So the number one question that we usually get when we're talking about SEO testing is, isn't that just the same as Optimizely or other user testing tools? The short answer here is no, and this is due to a few factors. So the main difference is the way that we bucket the pages versus how you would do typical user testing. So if you're familiar with running user tests, you'll know that you have 2 versions of every page. So we'll have an A version and a B version of each book product page, for example. So the idea would be if 100 people visited a product page, 50 of them would see A version, 50 of them would see B version, and then you would run analysis to see which group of pages ended up outperforming the other. This doesn't work for SEO testing because our user is Googlebot and there's only one Googlebot. So we don't want to be showing them 2 or more different versions of the same page. This can obviously cause issues with duplicate content and cloaking. So that's why we can't use user testing platforms to run our SEO testing, because the bucketing mechanism is fundamentally different. So when it comes to SEO testing, we only have one version of every page, and then we'll look at the performance of all A pages versus all B pages to determine whether or not the changed version of the page is better than the original. And one of the crucial differences is that Search Pilot is a server-side tool. So that means that search engines like Google can actually see the changes that we've made. And this is obviously essential for SEO testing because we know that Googlebot can struggle with those client-side changes. So to ensure that we definitely know they're seeing what we want them to see, we want to run it server-side. And Search Pilot does also offer the ability to run user tests, as well as SEO tests, or we can look at both at the same time using full funnel. So I just want to give you a quick look at the interface, how it all works. So here's a quick demo for how we would set up a test for a website like eBay. See if we can get this working. Cool. So in this example, we're looking at this product page for eBay, and we're going to be looking at the title tags. So currently you'll see the title tags are actually just the product name itself. So if we want to make a change to that and update it, we'll go back to the Search Pilot platform and we'll make a global rule where we're replacing that text. So if we then jump back in and we refresh the page, you'll be able to see when we take a look at the title tag, we've updated that. So we've got the product name or some random context and then the product price. So we've been able to dynamically pull that price from the page and use that in the title tag. Then if we take a look at the source code, you'll see it's in here as well. So we're changing both the HTML and the rendered JavaScript. Once you have the test running, you'll be able to see the results within Search Pilot. So here we've moved this down to be a split test rule. So we can run that as a split test. And then once we have that running, we can jump into the results here. So click into a running test, and this is going to show you the results. So we have the traffic chart. So this displays the actual traffic compared to the forecasted traffic. So you can see here, following the test launch, the actual traffic starts to outperform the forecast. So this is displaying potentially positive test. Then we have our confidence interval fan. So this, as standard, is the 95th percentile. So with this, we're saying if we did this test 100 times, 95 out of the 100, we would expect the result to be within that blue fan. Then we also have the ability to see how many pages have been seen and subsequently crawled by Google over the course of the test. So we can make sure that that gets as close to 100% as possible. We also have the ability to see how many pages have been seen and how long it will take for Google to see all of the pages to that variant, so we know that all of the changes have been made. So just before we get to the test ideas, let's put into perspective the value of SEO as a channel and how important it is to test changes before we roll them out. So let's look at an example of how much a 5% drop in organic traffic could impact a website. So say, for example, the total revenue for a website is 600 million. We can estimate about 20% of sales are driven by organic traffic, and about 80% of that is non-branded. Therefore, we'd be looking at around 96 million, if we round that to 100 million, of revenue that's impacted by the SEO team each year. What this means is that if a website were to roll out a change that has a 5% negative impact to SEO, you'd be looking at a loss of around 5 million in sales per year. And that's why Search Pilot exists. That's why we care so much about SEO testing, because it's critical for large enterprise brands because it allows you to both get winning tests that are going to improve organic traffic as well as reduce the impact of a negative change. So we work with some of the biggest brands in the world who might not necessarily be looking to increase their market share by a massive percent. It's also about ensuring that they don't roll out something that's going to negatively impact their organic traffic. And I love this quote from our CEO. I often find myself quoting it. It's that sometimes our customers' biggest wins come from never deploying losers rather than only deploying winners. So just before I get into the ideation part, I just want to pause here and see if anyone has any questions on that. Feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A bit. I don't want to spend too much time on questions at this point. We should have some time at the end, but if anything's come up from what we just went through that you want to ask, so you don't forget at the end, feel free to drop those in there now. I'll just give a couple of minutes. If not, we'll jump into the ideation part. Okay, cool. Let's get to the ideation part then. So the way that I tend to come up with test ideas is to look at some of the different elements of SEO. So we'll look at crawling, indexing, and ranking to start with. So the first two, we're looking at things like, can you rank? Do you have the ability to rank? Then with the ranking part, even if you are getting indexed, does Google think that you're actually good enough to rank highly in search results? And then once you're ranking, is your search result enticing enough that users want to click through to your website? The other really useful thing that I do is visually compare a website with its competitors and look at both the mobile and the desktop versions of a page to identify things that one website is doing that potentially another is not. I'll then take that information, add it to a table, and see how they compare. And this helps us to generate a lot of interesting test ideas, but it's also a really great way to do some competitor research. I'm also looking at a mix of UK and US brands, so I can see an even bigger picture of competitors, so it can be beneficial to also review different markets and compare that way. It's also valuable to look at search results to see the title tags and meta descriptions, any rich results that display for your search terms, so you can get an idea for content that you can include or schema that you can add. I also want to make sure that I'm looking at what Googlebot is able to see. So usually I'll use the rich results test to make sure that I see an accurate representation of what Googlebot is seeing without needing to use Search Console to fetch the page as Googlebot. So for my own website, I could use Search Console, see how that's fetched. But if I wanted to look at competitors, I could use something like rich results and fetch that as Googlebot just to make sure that I'm seeing what they're seeing. And then once you have the ideas, the next step is to prioritize them by effort and reward. So we use this framework to help us prioritize. So on our x-axis, we have from weak to strong hypotheses. And then on the y-axis, we look at cheap change to expensive change. So ideally, we're wanting to run tests that have a strong hypothesis and are relatively cheap to implement. But it doesn't always have to be tests within that pink quadrant. You could also have some that are in the yellow. It's just about how we use the data that we get to make the best decisions. So the players that we've got for today's webinar are these three companies, Waterstones, WHSmith, and Barnes & Noble. I've included some details about each brand in case you aren't familiar with them, and they all have brick and mortar stores alongside their e-com websites. And just before I get into the test ideas, I wanted to give a quick disclaimer. So these are just examples of what we could test on websites using these brands as an example. So I'm not trying to bash any brands or anything, just using them as an example and how we can come up with test ideas. So this is just to share insights on what might be helpful, and all thoughts and opinions are my own. So I've split the ideas that I'm going to run through today into 4 categories. So we'll look at some of the more basic metadata tests, and then we'll go into more complex internal linking and content changes. So let's get started with our metadata test ideas. So we know that metadata, that includes our titles and our descriptions, play a significant role in influencing rankings and impacting click-through rates from search results. So we believe that if we optimize these by incorporating additional target keywords, improving the clarity and appeal of the title and description, that's going to enhance our search visibility and attract a higher click-through rate, which will in turn obviously lead to an increase in organic traffic. So title tags are some of the most impactful tests we run because although they're relatively easy to set up, we tend to see some concrete impact from them. So rather than just show you a bunch of ideas, I wanted to run through how we can come up with some ideas and look at iterative testing for metadata. So there's a lot we can learn from competitor analysis, like I mentioned before. So we can review the content that each brand displays within their title tags and the meta descriptions by just looking at the SERPs. So you can see here there's some clear differences between the 3 results for the same search term. And there's something that we can learn from each that's going to help the others improve. So we'll start with Waterstones. They have a lot of potential for improving their category title tags. Currently, they just have the genre of the book, no other details like the brand term or any intent modifiers or additional keywords. So we can look to test things such as adding the best or buy or shop. And running multiple title tags tests is always a good idea because we can find benchmark data and we can identify the best formula that's going to improve rankings and our organic traffic. So like Barnes & Noble in the US, WHSmith and Waterstones are well-known brands in the UK. They're recognizable, they're trustworthy. So including their brand name in the title could be a good way to improve trust signals and in turn clicks through to the page. So WHSmith do actually include their brand name in the title that they've set, but a lot of the times Google is just choosing to ignore it, as we know they like to do. So we could test another way of getting their brand name in, see if Google then start to include it and if that helps to increase click-throughs. So we can make it part of the content rather than just tagging it onto the end after the pipe. So we can actually make it into the full content say these books are available at WHSmith, and see if Google shows that and if that then impacts our click-through rates. We also want to ensure that Google is showing the meta descriptions that we want them to show, because we know that they play a key role in influencing click-through rates. And we also know that Google generally chooses to rewrite them. In this case, Google is choosing to rewrite the meta descriptions for most of the PDP pages for Waterstones and WHSmith, which is slightly annoying because they are displaying some really useful promotions, so notably the free delivery offer that WHSmith and Waterstones both have. So we do actually have the opportunity to instruct Google to display the meta description that we actually want them to. So since September 2019, Google's provided us with the option to add a data no snippet attribute to elements. This is basically instructing Google not to use the part of the page that we're asking them not to within the snippets in search results. So what we could do is test adding a data no snippet attribute to a div that's just inside the body tag to prevent Google from pulling any content from the body of the page. So we're therefore effectively forcing Google to revert back to the meta description that we've set. That's in the head of the page and not the body. We've got this div throughout the whole body. We don't want them to pick up anything. We just want them to see what we've got in the head. We could then test whether including the free delivery promotion within the meta description and actually having that show up in search results is an effective way to improve click-throughs to the pages. So while Waterstones and WHSmith do include details about their free shipping policy within their meta description, Barnes & Nobles currently don't, despite the fact that they offer it. So we believe that if we include information about free shipping in the meta descriptions, we'll likely entice users that are looking for offers like that, and that's going to lead to higher click-through rates, but also a potential boost in conversion rates, because we're helping to contribute to maybe a more qualified traffic, actually people that might be, keen on buying. So what we could do for Barnes & Noble is look at testing, slightly reworking their meta descriptions to include details around free shipping and local store collection. So we can see on the page that these offers are available. And to ensure that it's only included on the pages that do have those available, we can use some logic and some dynamic rules on the page that say essentially, if we see this ship this item qualifies for free shipping present on the page, we can include that in our meta description, and if it's not there, we just don't want to include it. Another tactic that none of the brands are doing at the moment, but would be good to test, is including the price of the product in the title tag. So if I was searching for this book and I could see clearly in the title tag, very clear there, that it's slightly cheaper from another website, I'm maybe more likely to click through to that page. So we know that users are notoriously price sensitive, rightly so. So having the prices advertised right there in the SERPs is going to offer like an upfront understanding of the cost and potentially lead to high click-throughs. And again, the potential to contribute to that more higher quality traffic that are more likely to convert when they land on the product page. So let's have a look now at internal linking tests. So we know internal linking is important. It aids in distributing page rank, helps establish content hierarchy, helps Google find and crawl more pages, and it also helps to guide users to more relevant information. So we believe that if we make some strategic adjustments to internal linking, we're going to improve the flow of page rank, we're going to help make the pages more visible, and we will therefore hopefully boost the search engine ranking of the linked pages, whilst also helping to enhance user experience and retention on the page. So internal linking tests are a little bit more advanced. They require a slightly more complex test build. So I just wanted to take a minute to run through the kind of theory behind that and how we would look to set those up. Because with internal linking testing, we're not just looking at the impact of the pages that we're adding the links to, we also want to measure the impact of the pages that we're linking out to. So first of all, when it comes to bucketing, we'd start at the category level. That's where we're adding our links. So fantasy, classics, and crime, they're going to fall into our control group. And therefore, all of the product pages that are within those categories are also going to be our control group. And the same will be said for variant. So all of the product pages that fall within the variant page categories are going to become our variant pages. So we make the changes to our category page, and this becomes our testing section. This is where we're actually making the test. And then the pages that we're linking to are going to become our measurement section, so our first measurement section. We do this because we might see that the measurement section has an increase in organic traffic because they've just received a bunch of new links. But the original section that we're adding the links to, actually sees a decrease. So we can't really say if the change is worth rolling out or not. It might be a net zero, it might be a net negative change. So therefore, we want to make our second measurement section, which will be looking at the overall impact of the experiment. So we can say for sure whether this is something that's worth rolling out or actually it doesn't have too much of an impact. So let's jump into the test ideas for internal linking. So I'm going to start with breadcrumbs. We know that Google loves breadcrumbs as much as users do. Google uses them as a way to crawl content. They provide a way of figuring out the structure, how pages are connected. They help to strengthen the internal link architecture, but they're also like a natural way that we can get keywords in there above the fold. So that's, particularly useful if we're looking at more long tail keywords. So it's another reason why we want to make sure they're as specific as possible for each page. Currently, Waterstones have this really cool breadcrumb structure where they list all of the categories that a particular book can fall under at the top of the page. So there's multiple ways that you can navigate towards this book from multiple different categories, and they make sure to include all of the instances within their breadcrumbs. If we compare this with Barnes & Noble, they just link back to their homepage and their all books pages. We therefore believe that if Barnes & Noble were to enhance the breadcrumbs on their PDP pages in a similar way, or even just add one, like going back to the category, we will improve user navigation, user experience, and potentially a positive impact to search engine crawling and indexing. WHSmith have these really comprehensive breadcrumbs on their desktop pages. I just spoke about why they're so useful for both search engines and users. If we look at this product page on mobile, they're not actually present. So if we're assuming that Google is crawling predominantly with their mobile bot, it's likely they're actually not crawling these useful internal links. If I view the page using the mobile friendly test, render the page using Googlebot smartphone, we can see these breadcrumbs are definitely not there, and therefore we can assume that they're not actually being crawled by Googlebot if they choose not to crawl the desktop page. Therefore, a test that we could run here is making these breadcrumbs actually visible on the mobile site, and then we can identify the impact of the traffic to the traffic of the pages that we're linking within those breadcrumbs, as well as the product page itself. So as well as ensuring Google is able to find and crawl more pages, we know that it's important that internal links are relevant and they're going to direct users and search engines to related pages, rather than just random pages in order to get links to those pages. Barnes & Noble do this really well. They have 3 separate sections on each PDP page where they link to relevant product and category pages. So this is their related searches, we have their related items and their related subjects. Waterstones have one element that contains further internal links to other relevant books, but we know that from the Barnes & Noble example, there's some other opportunities they have to add even more internal links that are going to be used to help keep users on the site for longer and open up more pages to be crawled. For example, they could add a related searches element or include links to other relevant product pages or even category pages. So while Waterstones do have some relevant links, WHSmith currently don't. So therefore, a test that would be worthwhile running would be adding an element that can link out to other relevant products. So we could start with books that are written by the same author, in the same series, or even based on the genre of the book, and analyze the impact of organic traffic to the pages that we're linking to. This can help us to identify, one, if the test is positive, but it's also going to provide us with data to get buy-in and internal resource to implement this change across the whole site, because this would be a big change to roll out site-wide. So it's important that we have the data to back up the effectiveness of the change and validate that it works before a lot of work goes into doing that across the whole site. Now we'll have a look at some content test ideas. So we know that high quality relevant content is a crucial factor for search engine rankings. We want content that provides valuable information, answers user queries, and has like a real comprehensive view of the topic. They're the ones that tend to do better in SERPs. That's what we want to be working towards, particularly with the helpful content update that Google is continually rolling out. So this is a piece of content that I really like on the category pages for Barnes & Noble. They have a section where they list and link to things like best books of all time, or best books of this year, best books to read in your lifetime. So this is an example of both evergreen and more fresh, updated, more timely content. And there's also the space to link to PDPs, the PDPs for those books. So this is kind of a 2-in-1. We've got content, we've also got internal links. This content also ties into their title tag, so it answers that user query of best books in the genre. So we believe that if we add a best books list to our category pages, along with some relevant links, we'll provide users with valuable recommendations. And search engines are going to interpret the presence of this as valuable content, hopefully, which is potentially going to improve our organic search visibility and increase the visibility to those internal links, and therefore help with the rankings of those pages as well. There's also a lot of talk in the SEO industry about the placement of content, as well as ensuring that it's helpful for users and not just search engines. So we've run several tests in the past where we look at the placement of text, moving the placement to see if this has any impact on the organic traffic. So one of these is adding content higher up on the page, because we know that content placement can influence things like user engagement, readability, and help search engines' understanding of the page's topic. So we can see that Waterstones and Barnes & Noble have a couple of sentences of content at the top. It's not a huge amount of content, but it is useful context for the page, can help them to rank for more keywords. And also Waterstones use this as a way to add even more internal links to relevant pages across their site. And WHSmith have some really great content for each of their categories. This also has helpful links, but it is at the bottom of the page. So a test that we could do here is moving this content higher above the page, because we believe that if we move that above the page, above the fold, we're going to help improve the user experience and then potentially help enhance search engine visibility. And in turn, we will help improve rankings and traffic. So let's take a look at structured data. So we know that structured data, which we'll add in the form of schema markup, is going to help search engines understand the context, the content of a page, but it can also lead to enhanced search result appearances, so rich snippets, and they're going to help with our click-through rates and user engagement. So if we have a look at some structured data that is going to accurately represent the content, the purpose of our web page, will potentially help the understanding of the page and maybe even add some rich snippets for our pages. So I raved about Waterstones breadcrumbs earlier on, but they don't actually use structured markup for them. So we know that Google uses breadcrumb markup to categorize the information from a page that they find in search results. So we believe that if Waterstones were to follow WHSmith's example here with their lovely breadcrumb schema, will provide search engines with more clear information about the structure and then potentially contribute to an improvement in organic search visibility. And if there are multiple ways to navigate to a page on a site, as Waterstones have, there is also the ability to specify multiple breadcrumb trails for a single page. So this is an example of how Waterstones could look to implement their breadcrumb marker for that example PDP page. Another useful structured markup format that WHSmith have, but Waterstones and Barnes & Nobles don't currently, is list schema on their category pages. So we know that list schema can help provide search engines with data that enhances their understanding of the organization of the page and what is on the page. So we think there's an opportunity here to test including this category on category pages for Waterstones and Barnes & Noble, see if there's an improvement, again, to both the category page and the product pages that are contained on that category page. An interesting find when reviewing the brands against each other was that Waterstones and WHSmith both use book markup. So while Barnes & Noble have chosen to go with product schema markup. So as well as having the same properties that can be used in product markup, so name, description, offers, reviews, there are some additional ones that are specific to the book type. So you can do things like book format, number of pages, the date it was published, the author, if it's won any awards, and you can also include characters if it has a recognizable character. So this test we're going to be basically using to identify whether improving the specificity of the markup that we use has an impact on the way the page is ranked and displayed in SERPs, and again, whether it's worth using internal engineering resource to update this throughout the site. There's so many different schema markup types that we could be taking advantage of. So the key takeaway here is to review the ones that you believe will work best for your specific website and industry. So my background is in technical SEO, so I'm going to go a little bit technical on you for a second, because we know that technical SEO is the foundation of website performance. It influences all of the factors: crawlability, ability to index, and just overall rankings. So this is something that I came across quite a bit when I first started working in SEO, and there's a lot of conflicting advice on this topic, and it's around using canonicals and no index tags simultaneously. We know that canonical tags and no index tags are essential tools in helping to guide search engines in understanding how they need to treat duplicate content and non-indexable content. And the best practice recommendation has always been to not use both at the same time. And this is because you can cause some conflicting signals, indexing uncertainty, and even dilute the effectiveness. So we can see here for category format facet pages. By format, I mean like paperback, hardback, ebook. WHSmith are canonicalizing back to the main category page. Waterstones have decided to no index the format page as standard. On the other hand, Barnes & Noble are including both a canonical back to the main category page and a no index tag. So we believe that if we look to implement either a canonical tag or a no index tag alone, rather than using both, will lead to a more consistent and clear signal for search engines, while also improving the organic traffic to the page that we've set as the canonical. So a test that we could run for Barnes & Noble here is to remove the no index tag, just have the canonical present, and then we could even follow that up where we remove the canonical and just have the no index. And then we'll be evaluating here whether having only one of these options at a time, we're helping make improvements to signals in search engines to increase the organic traffic to the page that's currently set as that canonical. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of conflicting advice on this topic. So a test like this can also be used to validate whether the things that Google say are best practice do actually have the impact we think they do, which approach is best to take for your individual website, and most importantly, whether resource should be put towards making the change across the site. And last one, I promise, if you couldn't tell by now, I am a big fan of structured markup and the impact that it can have on search engines' ability to understand and better rank pages. So I'm going to end on one final one. This time, we're going to look at store pages. We've left them out a little bit, but each of our featured brands have physical stores, and there's pages that are present on each website for each individual store. So bookstore schema, that can help provide search engines with useful data that highlights, one, the presence of a store, but also the specific details of the offering. So Barnes & Noble currently have it here, Waterstones and WHSmith don't. So there's the potential that if we can add some bookstore markup to those pages, we're going to increase the visibility of the pages and therefore maybe lead to an improvement in organic traffic for those pages. And like I say, Barnes & Noble do have it, but they do have the potential to enhance their markup even further by taking advantage of the event property and including any upcoming events that are promoted on the bookstore pages. So that could be online events or in-store events. Okay, so we made it to the end. Here's that QR code again to sign up for our case study. If you missed it at the beginning, this has been recorded. We'll make sure the recording goes out to everyone in about a week's time, along with the slides, so you can grab any links. We do have some time for questions if anyone has any. I can see there are a few in there at the moment, so I'm going to jump to them now. But here is a link to my email if you want to email me with any questions that you've got or want to chat about anything further. You can also find us on Twitter there with the links. So yeah, let's jump to the questions. Okay, cool. So how much historical data do you need to create tests and control groups? Great question. I didn't actually cover that. So we want to use 100 days of historical data to create those groups. So we want 100 days from Google Analytics of historical data to help us to create those groups. Yes, we can. We can tell Google what we want to display, what we don't want to display. I've added a link in the slides, so hopefully that will give you some more information on that and maybe something you can explore. We have tried testing this a few times. We've seen multiple different results. Sometimes the meta description that Google sets actually is better and does, and when we actually remove that and make them use our meta description, we actually see a negative test. But sometimes there is important things we want them to include. Did you ever test structured data which won't change the appearance in SERPs? Yes, actually, I've been doing this for a customer recently. So we made some changes on the page and we didn't really see any impact to the content. So we were adding some like contact detail information, trying to kind of get those trust signals up. We didn't actually see an impact to the results from that. But then when we actually tested just adding that as like organization schema with that contact detail information, we actually did see a positive test. So it's just, I don't know, helping Google to see that content. They're not actually seeing it on the page, they're seeing it in the markup, and that did actually help us. So yeah, sometimes it's not always about those on-page changes. Sometimes it's the more behind the scenes in the markup format that they want to see that can help us. So yeah, great question. We could also look at schema that doesn't actually change the appearance in SERPs. How do you ensure the valid, I can't say that word, of a big test amid a suddenly launched core update? Yeah, great question. So that's why we have our control group, because our control group would also be impacted by that core update. So we would be able to say this wasn't impacted by a core update because we can see what would have happened to our page had no change been made, but had a core update actually happened at the same time. So we would see that fluctuation within our control group, and that would impact our variant group. So we would be able to say, okay, this was impacted, and then we would see actually the difference realistically between the two were we hit by an update. So that's why we include both of the variant and the control group and the historical data, so we can see what that would look like and compare the two against each other. Hopefully that helps. I think we've got through all of the questions. Like I say, feel free to email me if you have any more questions. We're going to share the slides as well and the recording. So once you've been through that, if you have any questions from that, feel free to email me, or you can find me on Twitter. Yeah, thanks so much for joining today. Like I say, feel free to send me an email if you want to chat about anything further, and stay tuned for the announcement of our next webinar, which is coming really soon. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. Thank you so much, everyone.